I know I'm just an old guy spinning tales, but some tales aren't meant to be ignored. Trust me, you'll want to hear this one. So turn down the lights, settle in, and let's dive into today's chilling stories. Before we begin, a fair warning. What you're about to hear is purely for entertainment. These stories and theories, they're nothing more than shadows in the dark. No proof, just whispers carried by the night. Listen closely, but don't say, "I didn't warn you." Viewer discretion is strongly advised. It was supposed to be a quiet getaway. After months of burnout from work, I decided to take a break and book an Airbnb in a small, picturesque town off the beaten path. The listing looked perfect. A quaint, two-story house with a charming garden and cozy interiors. The reviews raved about how peaceful it was, and the host, Mr. Carter, was described as friendly and accommodating. When I pulled up to the house, everything seemed just as advertised. The shutters were freshly painted, flowers lined the walkway, and the air smelled crisp and clean. Mr. Carter greeted me on the porch, his smile wide but oddly stiff. "Welcome! You're going to love it here," he said, his voice warm but strangely rehearsed. "Let me show you around." The inside of the house was just as cozy as the pictures. A large fireplace dominated the living room, and the kitchen had a rustic charm. Upstairs, the bedrooms were neatly arranged, with soft lighting and thick curtains. But there was something off. As Mr. Carter led me down the hallway, I noticed a faint, musty smell that didn't match the rest of the house. It seemed to come from the far end of the hall, near a closed door. "What's in there?" I asked, pointing to the door. Mr. Carter's smile faltered for a split second before returning. "Oh, just some storage. It's locked, and there's nothing you need in there." His tone made it clear the subject was off limits, so I didn't press further. That night, I settled in with a book, enjoying the quiet. The fireplace crackled softly, and for a while, everything felt perfect. But as I was getting ready for bed, I heard something. Faint footsteps, like someone walking above me. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling, but then it happened again. The sound wasn't random. It was deliberate, moving from one end of the house to the other. I went upstairs to check, but the hallway was empty. The locked door at the end seemed unchanged, but the smell was stronger now, like damp wood mixed with something metallic. Trying to shake off the unease, I returned to my room and locked the door. The next morning, I noticed small things out of place. My phone, which I'd left charging on the nightstand, was on the dresser. A chair in the corner of the room had been slightly moved. I brushed it off, assuming I'd forgotten where I'd placed them. But when I went downstairs, I found the back door slightly ajar, even though I was sure I'd locked it the night before. Mr. Carter stopped by later to check in, his smile as wide as ever. "How's everything? Sleeping well?" he asked, his tone casual. "Yeah," I lied, not wanting to sound paranoid. But as he turned to leave, I couldn't help but ask, "Are there any animals around here? I thought I heard footsteps last night." His smile froze, and for a moment, he just stared at me. Then he laughed, a little too loudly. "Oh no, this place is as quiet as it gets. Must have been your imagination." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. That evening, while exploring the house, I noticed something odd about the wallpaper in the upstairs hallway. Near the locked door, there was a faint bulge, as if something was hidden beneath it. Curiosity got the better of me. I pressed my hand against the wallpaper, and it shifted slightly. Peeling it back revealed the outline of a small hidden door, the edges old and splintered. My heart raced as I stared at it. It wasn't part of the house's design, at least not the part anyone was supposed to see. I stared at the hidden door, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't part of the house's original layout. Its rough edges and uneven wood were clear signs it had been added later, and not with much care. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the small latch. "Don't be ridiculous," I muttered to myself. "It's just a storage space." But my gut told me otherwise. The latch was old and rusty, but it gave way with a faint creak. Slowly, I pulled the door open, the musty smell hitting me like a wave. Inside was a narrow, dark staircase leading down, the air colder with each step. For a moment, I considered turning back, but then I saw something glint in the faint light coming from my phone's flashlight. A frame. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, each step echoing in the confined space. The air grew heavier, and the smell of damp wood mingled with something sharper, like old dried blood. At the bottom of the staircase was a small, windowless room. The space was barely larger than a closet, its walls covered in peeling paint and faded writing. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering weakly. The first thing I noticed was the photos, dozens of them, pinned to the walls with rusted nails. They were of different people, some smiling, some serious, all posed in front of the same house. This house. My stomach tightened when I spotted a photo of myself, taken just hours ago as I stood by my car. I stumbled back, my phone trembling in my hand. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. In the center of the room was an old trunk, its lid slightly ajar. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer and nudged it open with my foot. Inside were more photos, along with small personal items. A bracelet, a keychain, a child's toy. The hairs on my neck stood on end as I realized these items didn't belong to the same person. They were from different people, likely the ones in the photos, and none of the items looked recent. The sound of the front door opening upstairs made me freeze. "Hello?" Mr. Carter's voice echoed through the house. My heart raced. He wasn't supposed to be here. I scrambled to put everything back in place, carefully closing the trunk and pulling the hidden door shut as I made my way upstairs. Mr. Carter stood in the living room, his smile as wide as ever. But his eyes darted around, sharp and calculating. "Didn't mean to barge in," he said, his voice a little too casual. "I just forgot something I needed from the kitchen." His gaze flicked to my hands, still dusty from the hidden room. "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone light but his posture tense. I nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just settling in." "Good," he said, his smile tightening. "Let me know if you need anything." That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, and every creak of the floorboards made my heart jump. At some point, exhaustion overtook me, but I woke with a start hours later. My bedroom door, which I had locked, was wide open. The air was freezing, and the faint smell of damp wood lingered. I grabbed my phone, shining the flashlight around the room. Nothing seemed out of place until I turned to the mirror above the dresser. Scrawled across the glass, in what looked like ash, were the words, "Get out." When daylight came, I packed my bags and headed for the door, ready to leave the house and its secrets behind. But when I turned the knob, it wouldn't budge. The locks had been replaced. Panic set in as I tried the back door, the windows, anything to get out, but it was no use. I was trapped. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Why did you go into the basement?" I stared at the message on my phone, my blood running cold. "Why did you go into the basement?" My fingers hovered over the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. My thoughts raced. How did Mr. Carter know? I had found the hidden room. Had he been watching me this entire time? I turned toward the front door again, yanking at the handle, but it was useless. The locks were different, newer, sturdier, and they weren't moving. The windows, too, wouldn't budge, as if they had been sealed shut from the outside. A faint knock echoed through the house. It wasn't from the front door. It came from somewhere deeper inside, down the hall, where the hidden door was. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a cast-iron skillet from the kitchen, and crept toward the hallway. The musty smell grew stronger with every step, and the air turned colder. When I reached the door, I saw it was slightly ajar. The faint knock came again, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. But they weren't mine. They were slow, deliberate, and coming from the basement. I should have turned back, but curiosity, or fear, pushed me forward. With one trembling hand, I nudged the door open, revealing the staircase leading down to the hidden room. "Is someone there?" I called out, gripping the skillet tightly. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the silence was deafening. Then, a soft, chilling voice whispered from the darkness. "You shouldn't have come here." I stumbled back, slamming the door shut and bolting down the hallway. My heart pounded as I locked myself in the bedroom, leaning against the door. My phone buzzed again. "You can't leave now." The text came with a photo, a picture of me standing at the door to the hidden room. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. "Who are you?" I whispered to the empty room. The only answer was the faint sound of something dragging across the floor upstairs. Desperation overtook me. I tore through the house, searching for anything that could help me escape. Every drawer, every cabinet, every corner was empty, as if someone had cleared the place out long ago. Then I noticed something strange about the living room floor. A faint outline of a square was etched into the wooden planks, almost like a trapdoor. I grabbed a nearby chair and pried at the edges until the panel gave way, revealing a narrow crawl space. Inside was a small box covered in dust. The box contained faded photographs and a journal, its pages yellowed with age. The photos were of Mr. Carter, decades younger, standing beside different people. Some smiled, others looked uneasy. The journal told the rest of the story. Mr. Carter wasn't just a host, he was a predator. He used the house to lure in guests, watching their every move before trapping them. The hidden room was his trophy case, filled with belongings from those who never left. One entry sent chills down my spine. If they find the room, they can't leave. The house won't let them. Suddenly the air grew colder and the lights flickered. A low growl echoed through the house, and I froze. The growl wasn't human. It was guttural, deep, and came from everywhere at once. I backed into the wall, clutching the journal tightly. The growl turned into whispers, overlapping and incomprehensible. But one word stood out: stay. The shadows in the room shifted, pooling together in the corner. Slowly they took shape, a twisted, humanoid figure with hollow eyes and elongated limbs. It stepped toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural. "You can't leave!" it hissed, its voice layered with the cries of dozens of others. You belong to the house now. The front door creaked open, and heavy footsteps echoed through the house. Still poking around where you don't belong? Mr. Carter's voice called out, calm and cold. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart racing. The shadows retreated slightly, as if making room for him. He stepped into the living room, his smile gone. His eyes were cold, calculating, and they locked onto mine. You found the room, he said simply. That's unfortunate. Let me go, I said, my voice trembling. I won't tell anyone. He chuckled, shaking his head. It's not that simple. The house, it doesn't let go. The growl returned, louder this time, and the shadowy figure loomed behind him. What is that? I shouted, pointing. He turned, his expression hardening. That, he said, is the house, and it's hungry. Before I could react, the figure lunged, its hollow eyes fixed on me. I swung the skillet wildly, the impact passing through its form like smoke. Mr. Carter laughed. You can't fight it, but you can join it. He stepped closer, reaching for me, but I grabbed the journal and hurled it into the fireplace. No! He screamed, lunging for the flames. As the journal burned, the house began to shake. The shadowy figure let out a piercing scream, its form dissolving into smoke. The locks on the doors clicked open, and the air grew lighter. I didn't wait. I bolted for the door, stumbling into the sunlight. Behind me, the house groaned, its windows shattering as the shadows inside consumed it. When I turned back, Mr. Carter was gone. I drove as far as I could, not stopping until I reached a motel on the edge of town. That night, as I tried to sleep, my phone buzzed one last time. The message was simple. You can't run forever. I thought I was free. For days, I stayed at the motel, too scared to leave. The house was miles behind me, but its shadow lingered in my mind. The message on my phone haunted me. You can't run forever. I tried to convince myself it was over, that burning the journal had destroyed whatever power the house had. But, deep down, I wasn't so sure. The first few nights were quiet, but by the third, the nightmares began. In my dreams, I was back in the house. The hidden room was open, and the photos of the previous guests stared down at me, their eyes wide and lifeless. The shadowy figure loomed in the corner, whispering in a voice that chilled me to my core. You belong to us now. I woke up drenched in sweat, the faint smell of damp wood and smoke lingering in the motel room. I tried to tell myself it was just the trauma, but when I went to grab my phone, I froze. There was a new photo in my gallery, a picture of the hidden room taken from inside. I couldn't run anymore. Whatever had happened in that house wasn't finished with me. If I wanted to survive, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I drove back to the town near the Airbnb, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. The locals were reluctant to talk, but after enough questions, I pieced together a story. The house wasn't originally owned by Mr. Carter. Decades ago, it had belonged to a family, a couple and their young daughter. One night, a fire broke out, trapping the daughter in the basement. She was never found. The house was sold multiple times, but each owner reported strange occurrences, footsteps, whispers, even sightings of the little girl in the windows. Most didn't stay long. And then Mr. Carter bought it. No one knew much about him, but rumors swirled. Guests at his Airbnb often disappeared without a trace. Those who returned spoke of strange rooms and voices in the dark. I wasn't the first to escape, but I might be the last. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't stay away. I drove back to the house, now a crumbling wreck after the fire I'd caused. The windows were shattered, and the air around it felt heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. The door creaked open, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, the floorboards scorched, and the walls blackened. But the hidden door at the end of the hallway was still there, untouched. I descended the staircase one last time, the air growing colder with each step. The hidden room was as I'd left it, small, dark, and suffocating. The photos on the walls were gone, but the trunk in the center remained. I opened it, expecting to find the belongings of the house's victims. Instead, there was a single item inside, a mirror. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't right. My eyes were hollow, my face pale and gaunt. "You came back," a voice whispered behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The shadows in the room began to shift, pooling together once more. The figure emerged, taller and more menacing than before. Its voice was low and layered, as if dozens of people were speaking at once. "You burned my story," it hissed, "but you didn't burn me." I stepped back, my heart racing. "What do you want?" "To be remembered," it said, "to live. Through you." The shadows surged forward, enveloping me. The air turned icy, and I felt a crushing weight on my chest. I stumbled back toward the staircase, clawing my way up as the darkness chased me. The house groaned and shook, the walls seeming to close in around me. When I burst through the front door, the sunlight hit me like a wave of relief. But as I turned back, I saw the shadowy figure standing in the doorway, its hollow eyes fixed on me. "You can't escape," it whispered. "You're mine now." I left the house behind, driving as far as I could. But the nightmares continued, more vivid and terrifying than before. A week later, I woke up to find a letter slid under my motel door. It was addressed to me, with no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with the words, "List your Airbnb." I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the letter in my hands. "List your Airbnb." The words burned into my mind. It wasn't just a command, it was a threat. My first instinct was to rip the paper to shreds, but deep down, I knew that wouldn't make a difference. Whatever was tied to the house wasn't letting me go. That evening, I received another message on my phone, this time accompanied by an address. "Meet me here. Bring your phone." I considered ignoring it, but as night fell, the nightmares returned with a vengeance. Shadows moved in the corners of my room, and the faint smell of damp wood filled the air. I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the address, a rundown diner just outside of town. A man was waiting for me in a corner booth. He looked haggard, his face pale and his eyes sunken. As I approached, he motioned for me to sit. "You got the letter?" he said. I nodded, my throat dry. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter," he said, his voice hoarse. "What matters is that you do what they ask." "They?" I repeated. "The house," he said, his eyes darting nervously to the window. "It's alive. It doesn't just want people. It needs them. If you don't feed it, it'll come for you." He slid a piece of paper across the table. On it was a list of rules. List the property on Airbnb under a new name. Always accept bookings from those who travel alone. Never warn the guests. Do not visit the house unless instructed. If a guest survives, do not contact them. I stared at the list, my stomach twisting. "I can't do this. You're asking me to survive," he interrupted. "It's them or you. Trust me, you don't want to know what happens if you refuse." I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I convinced myself it was all a sick joke, a coincidence, or some elaborate scam. But as I opened my laptop to search for answers, my screen went black. When it came back on, the Airbnb page was already open. The property was listed, the photos uploaded, and my account was logged in. I hadn't done any of it. The name of the listing was simple: Cozy Secluded Getaway. It didn't take long. The first booking came within hours, a solo traveler named Eric. His message was polite and straightforward, thanking me for accepting his reservation. I wanted to warn him. I typed out a message explaining everything, begging him not to go. But when I hit send, the screen flickered. The message disappeared, replaced by a new one. Do not break the rules. When the day of Eric's check-in arrived, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I waited for updates, expecting a message or a review. Nothing came. The next morning, I received a notification. Your guest has checked out. Thank you for hosting. But Eric didn't leave a review, and his profile disappeared from the platform entirely. Weeks turned into months. The bookings came steadily. Solo travelers, adventurers, people looking for a quiet escape. And each time, I followed the rules. The nightmares eased, but they never truly stopped. The house's presence lingered, a constant weight pressing down on me. One day, a guest broke the pattern. Her name was Sarah, and she wasn't alone. She brought her dog. The moment Sarah checked in, the air around me grew heavy. My phone buzzed with a single message. Fix this. Panicked, I called Sarah, making up a story about needing to cancel the reservation. But she refused, insisting she'd already driven hours to get there. That night, I couldn't sleep. The shadows in my motel room grew darker, and I heard faint scratching at the windows. By morning, I received another message. She's gone. Don't let it happen again. Months later, I met another host. He found me after noticing the pattern in my listings. He had been trapped longer than me, and his warnings were grim. It never ends, he said. Not until the house finds someone stronger than it. What do you mean? I asked. The house doesn't just want victims. It's looking for a keeper, someone who can carry the curse. One night, I received a booking request from someone named Carter. My blood ran cold. The photo was the same man who had hosted me. He wanted to stay at the house. I accepted. The next morning, the listing disappeared from my account, and my phone buzzed with a final message. You're free. But when I looked in the mirror, I noticed something. My reflection smiled a little too wide, its hollow eyes staring back at me.